The House comes to question for oral answer question number 1 in the name of Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister of Finance. How is the government's management of the economy creating opportunities for New Zealanders?
The Honourable Bill English.
Mr Speaker, the ongoing growth of the economy is giving businesses the confidence to invest. ANZ's most recent survey of job advertisements shows that on a seasonally adjusted basis, job advertisements increased by 0.3% in September, the 8th consecutive month in which job ad numbers have increased. On a yearly basis, the number of jobs advertised in September was 13.5% higher than a year ago. More opportunities for New Zealanders and their families.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question, Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What does the ANZ survey tell us about regional economies?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, it shows that job growth was fairly robust in Auckland and Wellington, where ads are up 14.8 and 13.8% on a year ago. But there's a strong lift in employment intentions in the regions, including Waikato up 27% on a year ago, Hawke's Bay 17.6%, Manawatu 17% and Otago up 19% on a year ago. So clearly the regions are generating a lot more job opportunities.
Supplementary question, Grant Robertson.
Does he recall saying on the 11th of May 2011 that prisons were a moral and fiscal failure and that the Wiri prison would be the last prison his government built? And in light of his last answer, is his plan for regional economic growth just building more prisons? Is that as good as it gets?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I do recall saying that, and the statement I made about not building any more prisons turned out to be not correct. So the government now...
Order.
Well, actually, the government doesn't have much choice. The courts have sentencing criminals every week, and we've got to have somewhere to lock them up. Someone else.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What other reports has he seen that demonstrate New Zealanders are confident in the direction of the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, as I said, job advertising in the regions is up very strongly on last year. There's also improved consumer confidence. Consumer confidence rose in September for the 5th month in a row and is now at its highest level since late 2014. According to the survey, 35% of New Zealanders believe they are better off now than they were a year ago, and 25% think they're worse off. 44% expect to be better off in a year's time, compared to 13% who expect to be worse off.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
What effects does the Minister believe tax rates have on work, saving and investment activity?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I think it's fairly well established that tax rates are too high. They discourage work, saving and investment. However, because of tax reforms undertaken by this Parliament, New Zealand has now one of the lowest labour tax wages in the developed world. That is, for an extra hour of work, New Zealanders on average pay less tax than almost anyone else in the developed world.
Supplementary.
Order. Supplementary question, Todd Barclay.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What other reports has he received on the state of the economy?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I've seen in the last day or two a report asserting that most New Zealanders have seen their wages, quote, barely rise in recent years. That report is not only wrong, it overlooks the relationship between inflation and wages. For instance, between 1999 and 2008, after-tax wages increased by 35%, but inflation was 29% in that period. Since 2008, the after-tax wage has increased by a little bit less, that is 31% on average, but inflation has only been 12%. So real wages have increased much more quickly in the last 7 or 8 years than the decade before that.
Order. Supplementary question, David Seymour.
In light of his earlier answer, could the Minister elaborate on how the 51st Parliament has reduced the tax wedge faced by workers?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm referring maybe to the 50th Parliament, and that is the tax reforms done in 2010, where income tax rates were reduced, and that now shows up actually in the average source deduction tax as a proportion of GDP. It has dropped by 3 or 4 percentage points. That achieves what we set out to achieve, which is less tax on work, saving and investment, and more tax on consumption and property.
Supplementary question, David Seymour.
Does the Minister have any plans to reduce taxes in the 51st Parliament?
The Honourable Bill English.
Well, Mr Speaker, I wouldn't want to get into a debate with the member about which Parliament we're in or what might be the next one. But as indicated, the government is interested in further lowering taxes should economic and fiscal conditions allow. But that's in the context where, as we've seen in the last week or so, there is a cacophony of demands for how the government could spend its surpluses. The great thing is we're one of the very few developed countries who have those choices, because we're one of the very few who have rising surpluses.
Order. Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston.
Could the Minister for Finance explain to the whole country why it is that the National Party gives the ACT Party a right to ask questions, to box them around the ears so they can look like, in the case of the ACT Party, a real party?
Order. There is no minister. Order. There's no ministerial responsibility in that question. Question number